Burlesque is about so much more than just lovely women dancing on the stage in beautiful costumes. It is about empowerment and feminism and storytelling and comedy and drama and dance. There's so much to it. And as I was planning this little mini burlesque series that we're doing, I really wanted to learn more about the history of burlesque and what it means today, what it meant in the past, where we think it's going in the future. And so I called the person I think is probably the best person in the country to talk to about burlesque, Dustin Wax, the executive director of the Burlesque Hall of Fame in Las Vegas. So he's here today to tell us just all about burlesque, its history, and about all these wonderful heroes of the past who really brought the art form forward, who fought for women's rights, who were really extraordinary. It was an amazing conversation. I learned so much. I know you will as well. So I hope you enjoy it. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, share this with someone who may love learning about the history of burlesque. And if you missed last week's episode with the iconic, legendary Pearl Noir, be sure to watch or listen to that. And next week, we will have our final icon, legend, amazing burlesque performer to close out this little series. So I hope you enjoy it. Hello, everyone. I am thrilled. Our wonderful burlesque conversations continue, and I really wanted to dive more into the history of burlesque, some of the legends, because there is just so much there. So I am really thrilled, and we're so lucky to have Dustin Wax, who is the director of the Burlesque Hall of Fame. Hello, Dustin. Thank you for being here.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
So, Dustin, I always like to start by letting my guest tell everyone who you are and what you do.
Okay, well, I am as you said, the executive director of the Burlesque Hall of Fame. I've been there for 14 years. The Burlesque Hall of Fame is an organization committed to preserving, sharing, celebrating, and inspiring the art of burlesque. So we're looking backwards and forwards. I'm a anthropologist who focuses on primarily these days gender issues due to the nature of the work I do. But yeah, that's who I am and what I do.
Well, and I was really interested when I saw that you have a background in cultural anthropology. How did you get to the Burlesque Hall of Fame?
So, kind of by accident. I've always had an interest in kind of the interactions between different categories of people and how they kind of go wrong or can go right. And so I have always had an interest in race and ethnicity. My research as a graduate student was on the relationship between Native Americans and anthropologists, and also between sort of Native Americans and the communities around them. So that, sort of intergroup relations and so on. So when I started teaching, I got hired as an adjunct to teach women's studies, a class called Gender, Race, and Class. And so that was a great sort of outlet for talking about all these things. And my work sort of kind of naturally started focusing more and more on gender and sexuality and sexual orientation issues rather than the kind of ethnic issues that I've been focusing on before. And so around that time, I met the director of the Burlesque Hall of Fame, the former director. And she was not a museum worker or museum professional. She's not a nonprofit professional. She had kind of also fallen into this role through her relationship with the people who were running it before. And And she said, "Oh, all the stuff you're looking at, you should really look at a burlesque. You'd really be interested." And I just scoffed at her. I was like, "That burlesque is not a thing. This has, ceased to exist 50 years ago. How is this something?" And she told me, "No, there's a really strong burlesque. This is 2008, so there's a burlesque revival movement." And burlesque is a very active community. It's very much, along sort of feminist lines. People are very conscious of gender issues, race issues, sexual orientation issues, all these different things going on in the world around us are kind of coalescing in burlesque. And you should learn more. So she took me to a show. I saw it for the first time with her, and um, a couple of years later. So at the time, there was no museum. There had been a museum in California that was much more of a kind of roadside attraction, which is why people who weren't museum people were involved. They were people that were exotic dance people and
Right.
friends and fans. And so in 2010, she rented a tiny little space and to open a sort of tease of what a museum could be, because we had this great collection. And she asked me if I'd be interested. Well, I'd worked in museums. I'd always wanted to be involved with museums. And being here in Las Vegas, there weren't a lot of outlets for that. There weren't a lot of museums here in the early 2000s. We pretty much doubled the number of museums here. So I helped her set that up. I started volunteering there. And the goal was always we should get into a bigger space, somewhere where we can really bring this collection out and make the most of it, and really do this work. So, as I said, she kind of fallen into that role and was kind of starting to look at her next steps. And she asked me to help her develop a 5-year plan for how we could get into a bigger space and kind of make a real institution out of this. And I ended up doing most of that work. And when we presented it to a meeting of sort of board members and some other stakeholders, and they liked it. And she, like I said, she kind of wanted out, so they asked me to stay on and put that plan into action. So that's how I became the director. And yeah, so that was in 2011. And in 2017, we moved into a space. So it took 6.5 years instead of 5 years, but stuff happens. And yeah, so we opened that space. Unfortunately, we just closed that space. The sort of economic realities that we live in, the political realities we live in, have made it very difficult. Las Vegas tourism has dropped a bunch this year, particularly the groups that are our audience. And so we're moving into like kind of a different phase of doing a lot of things virtually, doing a lot of things with other museums and other institutions. But yeah, that's how I came to be involved with this.
What I love about that journey, two things. One, as a person who is also a nonprofit director, everything takes a lot longer than you think it's going to take.
Yeah. Yeah.
So much longer. But also, what I've found, particularly in the last little while that I've been doing research for these awesome burlesque interviews I'm doing, but even in the years that I've been sort of going to burlesque shows, is that so many people come to it from the same place that you came to it, which is burlesque is a thing, and then going and be like, oh my God, burlesque is a thing. It's so amazing. So what are some of the things that surprised you the most once you really started getting into the burlesque business about this art form that you didn't know before?
The things that surprised me the most. So first of all, I mean, the base thing is you think of burlesque as kind of 50s striptease, Las Vegas style, or you think of it as like Lily Von Stupp in Blazing Saddles, right? The kind of body show in the Western Saloon in the 1880s. And there's not a lot of ground. And so the fact that this was a rich theatrical tradition that existed long before striptease existed, that was kind of the first big thing, that there's this whole aspect of burlesque that's not about striptease. And once you start diving into that, you realize this is a form of comedy. This is not, when you go to a strip club, which fulfills some of the same function that a burlesque club might have filled 50 or 60 years ago, you go to watch women perform, and you're there for their physical appearance, and to some extent the dancing and loud music and sort of the overall experience. But it's very different from, or the experience of going to a burlesque show was a lot closer to like going to see stand up than it was to going into a strip club, because there was all this sort of political humor and topical humor and baked into it from the beginning, and so that was kind of a revelation to start thinking of this as a form of comedic theater rather than a form of sort of erotic theater, and to think of it as a political format, and then as I've done more and more research to find the depth of particularly gender bending is kind of baked in from the beginning, and you start realizing that it's all about, not just about man, woman, gender, sort of relations, but about what gender means. And then you start seeing there's trans people and people that may have not had that identity available to them, but who, if they live today, we would call trans, but kind of all the way back, as well as just sort of cross-dressing and gender non-binary sort of people who are hard to pin down anywhere. So the gender stuff was really surprising, because you think it's going to be a simple thing. It's just men looking at women, right? But it's really not. That's like the least part of it.
I went this summer and I saw Dita Von Teese's incredible show, which is where I got this shirt.
Mm-hmm.
I love this shirt. It's my new favorite. But the thing that surprised me is sort of exactly what you're saying. Like, I've been to, like smaller burlesque shows where maybe there've been a lot of different types of people, but I was like, this is a big Vegas show. It's going to be about showgirls. I was sort of expecting like new Ziegfeld Follies type of thing. And instead it was so wildly diverse and so gender bending. And so, there were men, like the two men doing the tango, like I'll never forget. Right. And all
which is the highlight act.
And I mean, like, mind blowing, right? Like, and it really made me, it was surprising and like so beautiful and so powerful, and made me think a lot about, the politics of burlesque. Has it historically always been that way, or is this something new that we're seeing in this new revival?
No, I mean, when we look at how burlesque came to the United States, it's the late 1860s, just after the Civil War. Lydia Thompson comes from England with her troupe of largely women, and the women are playing men's roles, and the costumes are gender bending is the only way I could put it, because she's playing Sinbad or a woodcutter or a soldier or whatever, and she's wearing an outfit that says, this is what this male character. This represents this male character, but then she's all like, is she wearing short shorts or a mini skirt and tights so you can see her legs, and maybe the shirt's kind of low cut so you can see the top of her cleavage, and so it's 1868 and you're sitting in the audience of this show and you're just like a normal red-blooded American male, and you're like, I'm like, this is a man, but because in the context of the play, this is a man, but I'm also kind of attracted to, like, you can look at me, I'm looking at sexy legs. And so there's this weird tension that's baked in right from the beginning, and everyone starts imitating her. Her group was called the Lydia Thompson and her British Blondes, and we start seeing British Blondes burlesque troops popping up because it's so popular that people are just trying to capitalize on on that style, and we start seeing the other burlesque troupes. We have all these posters from the 1870s and 80s where you see a soldier in a mini skirt and tights, or you see, these masculinized, or I should say feminized masculine characters. And so that's kind of always been there. And then as you move into the 20th century, once striptease comes in the late 20s, even though I mean, you still have that. We still have that to the present day. There are all kinds of people in drag, in various kinds of drag, that are doing striptease. And part of the reveal is very often, the body underneath doesn't look like the costume on top, but obviously, there's a harder, it's harder to camouflage what that body underneath looks like. But people did it. There were whole, Hetty Jo Star, who was a very early trans performer and a costume designer. She ran a girl show in the circus, in the Royal American Circus, and for like a decade, and all of her performers were female impersonators, and it was never broadcast. It was never communicated. And people were doing wild stuff there. She had performers that would have a breast implant put onto one side so they could do a half and half act. That's an act where when you dance with yourself and you face you face one way and you're the male part of the act, and you face the other way and you're the female part of the act. And there were these performers who would have this breast implant, so even after they stripped down, they were able to do both sides of the act. But they never said this is a female impersonator show. This was a girl show, and most people came away from the show thinking they just saw a bunch of pretty girls take their clothes off, and they didn't. And when that show broke up in the 60s, I kind of followed that a little bit, and a bunch of those performers end up in Seattle, and kind of the founders of the drag scene there. This kind of drag court system that emerges in Seattle. A lot of that comes out of these early these performers from her shows that were looking, for the same reason they were in the circus. They were looking for a safe harbor where they could be whatever they were, where they could be different, in whatever unique ways each of them was different from the people around them, and feel somewhat protected. And when they no longer had that protection in the circus, they found another place to build the same protection.
That's so interesting. I think that obviously the arts have always been a place where people who are different or from different communities can find safety. I think one thing that has stuck out to me about burlesque is that it's so much more exposed, right? And that you are doing this striptease dance, and your body is out there. And so even though you are someone who may be marginalized and seeking protection, you're also very proudly showing off who you are, which I think that is something that's unique, right? Because I'm a theater kid, but the great thing about theater is you can put on costumes and hide and be someone else, whereas in burlesque you are really stripping down to who you essentially are. It's a really interesting phenomenon.
Because we think of like people that are sports mascots or like Disney characters at the parks. They talk about, they put the costume on and then their inhibitions go away. The person that they are kind of goes away, and they are free to be Mickey Mouse or whatever, the armadillo that represents their high school sports team or whatever, and to be wild and just really crazy. And burlesque is very much the same thing, in that they're getting on stage as a persona, and that persona is freeing. but it's interesting because it's the exact opposite reason. Like the same outcome comes from revealing yourself on stage in a way that we don't ever do in sort of real life.
Yeah. It's interesting, and especially when I think about some of the women of color in the history of burlesque who have become very powerful figures, and they use burlesque to do it, like Josephine Baker or Coby Yee, who I know you guys had a really awesome exhibit featuring her, and she owned her own club and she toured and everything. Who are some of the, and I mean, I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about her, but also just some of the other who I'd call maybe unsung heroes, although I think Josephine Baker is a very sung hero, right? But like some of the heroes of burlesque who you think more people should know about.
Sure. Well, Coby Yee is a great example. The exhibition we had about her was subtitled "The Hardest Working Woman in Chinatown," because, yeah, like you said, she took over ownership of the Forbidden City nightclub, which was a huge deal in San Francisco, and she also ended up taking over another club, and so she would act as sort of the MCs or the host for both of those clubs at the same time. And so she would often be working, and they were just a couple blocks away, but she'd be working in one club. She'd go back to the other club, perform, change, host at that club for a little bit, go to the first club, perform, host at that club a little bit longer. Plus, she also had a school where she was teaching other dancers, and she was a costumer. So she was making costumes for her own acts and her performers in her own clubs, but she was also making costumes to order for other people. So yeah, she was just an incredible figure, and she only passed away a couple of years ago, but she was always just this like joyous presence in every time I met her, she was just so much happy to just be there. Her daughter comes into the museum all the time, and has kind of kept up a connection with us since she passed. Anyway, some of the other performers, one that I love, and she's not unsung, I guess, but I recently learned she was even mentioned on an episode of Sanford and Sons back in the 70s. Is Lottie the Body, and Lottie the Body was a black performer from Detroit. And she was, her tradition was, she came out of a Caribbean heritage. And so she had learned this Afro-Caribbean dance. And Afro-Caribbean dance has very complicated, Afro-Caribbean music as well, like very complicated rhythms, and polyrhythms and rhythms fighting against each other and so on. And so it's this very elaborate style of dance. And she got very much involved with the music scene in Detroit in the 60s, which, as we know, is pretty foundational music for all other, popular music since then. And so she would both jam with musicians. So they would be jamming and she would be dancing, and they would like try to come up with rhythms that kind of matched the dancing that she was doing. But she also worked in clubs, and all these musicians would moonlight in nightclubs. So at the time, in the sort of 60s when she was performing, the nightclubs would have a bass player and a drummer. And your job is not to play a song that the person's dancing to. Your job is to play a song to their dance. And these musicians would then go into the studios in Motown the next day with these crazy rhythms that they had learned from her hips, basically. And they talk about in Standing in the Shadows, they talk about, everything I put into that song, I got from Lottie the Body's hips. And her contribution to Detroit music was so great, to Motown primarily, was so great that in the 70s, she's given a key to the city by the mayor of Detroit. Like it's recognized that she was an important part of this music scene. She maybe didn't get a big building, get to own a big building in LA like Berry Gordy, but she played her part. Who are some of the others? Another Asian performer, Jadin Wong, started in the Forbidden City, and she is also not unsung among certain people. Asian American people love her. One of the most popular posts we ever made on Instagram was a post about her, because all the Asian people, I guess, were just sharing it with each other, because this is the 50s, 60s, 70s when there's no Asian performers, and so she started in the Forbidden City, and then she moved into uh, uh, mainstream theater, and then eventually became sort of recast herself as a comedian. And she like Barbara Streisand opened for her at one point.
Wow.
Yeah, like she was a big deal comedian, and then became an agent. And so she catered to Asian performers because there weren't Asian performers. She played like 3 roles on MASH because they always had a need for like Asian extras, and there were only like 8 people they could go to, for these characters that had one line or whatever in the show. And there just weren't a lot of performers that they had. So she was constantly being used as, she was the Asian actress that they could call for, to do a line in a TV show. And she's on a bunch of TV shows in that kind of capacity and movies and stuff. Mm-hmm. But, so she became an agent with the kind of goal of increasing the number of Asian performers out there. And she launched a lot of people on their way, and sort of later in her career, people that we would know today. She was the agent for Lou Diamond Phillips. She was the agent for Lucy Liu. So she was a big deal. And like I said, that was really a mission for her to make sure that there were actually Asian performers being represented in Hollywood. And so, that's just a couple. I mean, there's so many, people, I like to tell a story about Lydia Thompson because, and that's where we started at the museum, and because nobody's ever heard of her in the like mainstream, and she was a huge deal. But yeah, I mean, part of the reason we exist, and what our main job was at the museum, and what our main job still is on social media and on our website and through our shows, is most people don't know any of it. If they know anything, they know Gypsy Rose Lee because there's a movie and a Broadway play. And they may know Lily St. Cyr because they know the name from her being name checked in the Rocky Horror Picture Show. But they don't know who that is. They may know Mae West. They may know Josephine Baker. Maybe they know Sally Rand. Was a fan dancer. She was actually the model for the Sally. She was portrayed as Sally Strand in that cartoon with the wolf where his eyes pop out. Auga, auga.
Oh.
And she has a big balloon that she's dancing with.
Yes.
But they would film someone and then draw over it, basically rotoscope it, and she was the model in that. And of course they called it Sally Strand, so they were clearly referring to her. But other than this handful of people, like most people don't know any of the performers. And there's so many stories. Marenka, who lived here in Las Vegas up until she passed away a few years ago, wrote a biography right before she passed, and she came out after a 50-year career as having been trans, and had this astounding story of being a young boy in Cuba during the revolution, and her family sending them away because they were obviously this very sort of sensitive young boy at the time, who in a militarized environment was not going to survive, and so they sent Marenka away to family in New York, and she becomes a female impersonator, when she's older, and eventually becomes trans, but you know. Or I guess doesn't become trans, but eventually has operations to transform their physical appearance. But nobody knew. I mean, she was just Marenka. Marenka the Amazon. She's unusually tall. But other than that, like, nobody knew. And she talks about in her biography about like having to hide because in the 60s, people would target you. I mean, not that that's that different from today, but people, physically in your like local environment, if the other performers at the theater found out, they would target you and make your life more difficult. But and the way that the impact that had on their relationships over the course of her life. But she's a super successful performer. She had, a standing gig in like some resort in Switzerland every summer, would go there for 3 months and get paid tons of money. She bought a house. We talk about how women couldn't get a mortgage. It wasn't until the 80s that we started having laws that said women were allowed to get mortgages on their own. They didn't need a man to co-sign their mortgage. But she bought a house in the early 70s and she just paid cash. Mm-hmm. Because she had that much cash, so, and, had a relationship with Roy Scheider, and, it's like, there's so many people that have these incredible lives and make such an impact. So, that's a handful, and I could just sit here and, go down the list for hours of people that I think just have fascinating stories.
I mean, but even that small handful just tells you how many just absolutely amazing stories there are. I don't know how there aren't 10 million movies and like 4 TV series about burlesque dancers, because all of them had such fascinating lives that you could turn into, 6 seasons in a movie just about Sally Rand, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and part of that is, part of why there's not is the challenge that we face every day, which is it was considered, it's already sort of lowbrow entertainment, so it's considered kind of frivolous. And then on top of that, it's eroticized entertainment, so it's considered kind of a little shameful, a little scandalous, and so nobody really recorded it. Nobody wrote the history down, or thought it was that important. We have people's, recollections, and people wrote biographies and whatever, autobiographies and memoirs and whatnot. And then we have this really overheated, like sort of men's magazine copy of, which is mostly, I don't know, 80% flim flam, people who were, they had a shtick. They were masters of self-promotion, but is that the right story? Is that the real story? It's really hard to tell. And then, so we're constantly trying to fit together people's stories and find any mention at all of a person, because they just, nobody ever thought, oh, well, I mean, we know some of the big people who play big theaters in New York or Las Vegas or LA or Montreal or whatever, but what about the people that just had, they were the top performer at their club in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and just did that year in, year out for some period of time. So we end up with one movie. We got Blaze. One movie about and we got Gypsy. So I guess we have 2 movies. And because both of them wrote memoirs, and Blaze was involved with a national political scandal. So, but there's so many other people that had. Candy Barr was friends with Jack Ruby. Like that'd be, and Mickey Cohen, the mobster. Like that would be a cool story. There's a
That would
ton
be
of
awesome.
just amazing stories.
Also, Candy Bar, incredible name.
Right?
It's really good. So one of the things, though, that is amazing about a museum, and that I earnestly hope we're able to see displayed again, is you guys have some really incredible artifacts. Like two
Mm-hmm.
of my favorites, you have Dita's martini glass, which is iconic,
Mm-hmm.
and you have Gypsy Rose Lee's trunk, which is so amazing. What are some of your favorite artifacts in the museum?
Yeah. The trunk is a story in itself because before it was hers, it was her sister's, Jane Havoc's. And
Oh.
so it has her Havoc, stenciled onto the outside of it. And at
Mm-hmm.
some point, Gypsy was the star that Jane was like movie star, kind of a B-list movie star. And at some point, Gypsy's traveling schedule became more, uh, involved, than Jane's, and Jane gave her the traveling trunk. And it's just a wreck. It's been everywhere. Um,
It's
but yeah,
amazing.
some of yeah, speaking of Gypsy Rose Lee, I mean, one of my favorite artifacts is we have this little, it's a ceramic boot, and in the top of the boot where your foot would go, there's a velvet pad for pincushion. And
Oh.
it sums up all these things about Gypsy Rose Lee. Is one, she collected ceramic miniatures for some reason. That was her weird thing. Um,
Uh-huh.
but two, she sewed all of her own costumes,
Oh, yeah.
and three, uh, she hated zippers and eye loops and snaps and all these things that could fail. And so she would make a dress
Mm.
and she'd leave a seam open, and then she would put uh, straight pins to hold that. She'd put the dress on and then hold that seam shut with straight pins. And when she's on stage, she would pull those straight pins out one by one and plunk them. She performed with an orchestra, so she was
Mm-hmm.
known to plunk them into the bell of the tuba or onto the off of the drums, like the timpani drums. And so while she's stripping, like this long slow tease of pulling pins one by one and then plunking them onto a drum or into the orchestra, and wherever. And then so I have this little boot, this little pin cushion, and it's got all these straight pins in it, and I'm like, this is a costume. Like, this is part of a costume. Just like I have pasties, or I have a bra, or I have panties, or whatever. Like, I have
Yeah.
straight pins that were part of a costume. So I really like that. What are some other things? There's so much stuff that
Mm-hmm.
I have all these like little phases. And of course, we just moved the collection, so I've like looked at every single thing over the last couple of weeks. Um, we have a poster. This one's not like necessarily my favorite object, but it's just funny. We have a poster for this movie called She's Going to College. She's Headed to College. And it had a burlesque performer as the she in it, but it also was starring the love interest was Ronald Reagan. So I just love the kind of crossing of
Oh
streams of the
God.
burlesque world and the American political scene. Um,
That's really funny.
and we just got this just last year. We were donating a bunch of stuff that belonged to a performer named Blaze Fury, and we had all these great costumes, which they're just so fantastic. We immediately just put them up, some of them, to display because they were gorgeous. But we couldn't display this piece that it was a stage prop, and it was this giant. It's probably 8 feet across, plywood devil head, that it folds in half so you can move it. And, you know, cause she's traveling all over the country with it. And, but I mean, and it's hideous ugly, you know, it's you know, handmade stage prop of a devil's head. It's supposed to be ugly, but it's also been through some stuff, right? It's been all over the country. So I like that. There's a kind of class of things that I really like, which are photos or these big wooden marquee posters that they put on the outside of the theaters. In both cases, because they would move around, you know, as they travel from place to place, they don't know when they make their poster, you know, where it's going to end up. And every municipality has different rules about what can be shown, like what can be publicly sort of revealed. Right. And so the photos would also be like in the lobby or sometimes out on the street of like sort of coming attractions, right? And so they would draw with like marker or like acrylic paint sometimes. They would take photos in sort of pasties and a G-string, and then they draw whatever the minimal requirements were for the place it was going. And on these big marquee posters, they would have them printed, again, with sort of minimal clothing, and then they would use tempera paint to paint clothes onto them to sort of match both the regulation of where they were going, but also if they had a new act, they could paint it to represent, you know, this new act. It would have the dress that they're wearing in this new act. And then when they moved it to somewhere else, tempera paint's water soluble, so they could just, you know, wash it off, and paint a new thing on to match wherever it was going next. So I love this like class of things, like, yeah, because the laws are crazy. There's a magazine, pictorial in some men's magazine, I can't remember which one, from the 50s. It's a Betty Page pictorial where she wears a costume that represents the regulations in all 50 states. So it's a 50-page project. And, you know, there's places where you could be in a pasties and a G-string and that was fine. There's places where you have to be covered from the middle of your thigh to the top of your hip bone. A place where you have to be covered from the bottom of the dress to the clavicle. Like, there's all these, in some places you have to be there has to be fabric, but they would wear net, you know, so you could still see through it, but they were meeting the letter of the law. But it's so complicated. It's still so complicated. Even here in Las Vegas, there's a different set of laws for the city of Las Vegas than there is for the unincorporated Clark County. And most of what people think of as Las Vegas is unincorporated Clark County. And so there's stricter laws in the city of Las Vegas than in unincorporated Clark County. And we've run into that ourselves because we have this big annual festival every summer. And one year, and this is before my time, so I don't know all the details, but one year they had it in a hotel that just happened to be in, the boundaries are all weird. They're like, you know, they go up a street for a ways and then back down on the other side and then cut across a neighborhood. And they're really bizarre. But this hotel happened to be in the city of Las Vegas, so they had a different set of requirements. So we have this festival, and we have this big competition as part of it, and all these people come and they've been practicing their acts, and they have, you know, every clothing removal is like hammered down in time to a second so they can get their act done in this competition. And the venue says, by the way, everyone has to be wearing bras. We can't say anything from the nipple to the bottom of the breast, top of the nipple to the bottom of the breast. So everyone like scrambles because they didn't bring anything. They're all like storming to Walmart or whatever to buy things that they can cut into part of their costume, and then frantically trying to work that removal into their act. So it's, you know, it's you know, I always say that these laws are confusing on purpose. they rarely give you solid guidelines of what can and can't happen, of what has to be worn, what can't be worn. Because as soon as they do, then someone sues them and they're like, this thing isn't obscene in and of itself, and then, becomes a free speech, free expression issue. But if they keep it super vague, they're like, oh, you can't, arouse prurient interest or whatever, then nobody knows what the hell they're doing. Like, who knows what kind of freak is out there? I'm dressed like Cookie Monster. Maybe someone's, maybe that's arousing someone's prurient interest.
Oh, I'm sure it is. All right. I want to close out just with your thoughts on the future of burlesque. Where do you see it going?
Wow. Honestly, the last 6 months have been so wild. I'm hesitant to make any kind of prediction about anything whatsoever. It's one of the things that led to us having closed the museum was just the inability to know what's going to happen next week. The burlesque might be illegal. Who knows? Like, we're seeing them going after.
Where do you hope it goes? Maybe is a better question.
I think what we're going to see, is we're going to see, so there's a trend that's already been going on for several years. I think it's just going to get more and more, is the merging of drag and burlesque. And drag and burlesque have always had a connection, but they kind of split a little bit in the sort of mid 20th century for a while. But in the last 15, 20 years, they both play with gender expression, but they've evolved different paths. And now those paths are starting to come back together. We see, like, for instance, lip sync, which comes out of drag, is a sort of mainstay in drag, but has gone from something you hardly ever saw 15 years ago to something that maybe 1 out of 2 acts has a lip sync element to it now. And the same thing, if you go to a drag show, you see people taking their clothes off, people doing striptease. So I think those are going to continue to come together because the law is certainly defining them the same. Like, all those anti-drag laws, they also include burlesque. It's just we don't talk about that very much because our society isn't mad about women dressing in sexy women's clothing. They're just mad about men dressing in women's clothing. But also because it's kind of taken for granted there's no minors at a burlesque show because it's much more clearly adult. Like, we don't have burlesque story hour at the library.
Although we
maybe
should, I would argue.
Yeah, maybe. So, so I think we're going to see that. I think a lot of the last 20 years has been working through a lot of racial stuff, a lot of body positivity or body image stuff, a lot of, we're still only kind of just starting to see. There's still people who produce, for instance, all black shows because nobody else will cast black performers in their community. Mm-hmm. And so I think we're going to see more of that. I think we're seeing a mainstreaming of burlesque that has been, again, kind of creeping along. Obviously, like, there was the Christina Aguilera movie, which did a lot to make people aware that there was a thing called burlesque in the world, even though what it was didn't look a lot like what was in the movie. But but like, here in Las Vegas, we're seeing a lot of cirque shows have closed in the last few years, but we're starting to see more and more burlesque shows. Adidas show, which you mentioned, but there's this traveling Star Wars burlesque show that I saw 100,000 commercials for.
What? I need to see this.
I think it's called The Empire Strips Back. I haven't seen it. I know a couple of people have, but it's,
I have to see that.
when I start seeing TV commercials for some burlesque event, that's coming to my town for some residency of however long, like that, I think we're going to see more and more of that. And other than that, I think, burlesque has a kind of more professional side, and I think that mainstreaming is still happening, and it has a more kind of DIY let's throw a show kind of side. And all kinds of weird stuff happens there. And I think that is going to continue. And I think that that's going to be more and more important as the society we live in becomes, even more oppressive around us, as the kinds of expression we're allowed to make, are under more and more attack. That expression is going to get weirder. It's going to get wilder. It's going to get more aggressive and more aggressively more aggressively, my mind has to be spoken, and it's going to get angrier. And I think we're going to see a lot of that on the more sort of local DIY kind of side.
Yeah. It's a good time for everyone to watch Cabaret.
Yeah, exactly.
Dustin, this was so fascinating. I learned so much. I was furiously typing notes as you talked. I have so many people to research now. You're a font of information, and I can't thank you enough. We have interviews with Pearl Noir and Dirty Martini, who are just like two of the most extraordinary people I've ever met. And I really wanted to get more into the history, and you just gave us a masterclass. And I just thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for keeping the history of burlesque alive. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it.
Well, thanks so much for inviting me. And I hope your listeners will visit our website. It's burlesquehall.com. Yes. And we are in a weird phase right now, and so we can certainly use people's attention and people's assistance.
Yes, links to the Instagram and the website. You guys also have a YouTube channel with tons of great videos. The YouTube will be in all the links and notes. And I'm definitely, follow, subscribe. I saw that you guys are doing things. I love coming to Las Vegas. The next time you guys are doing a great event, I definitely will come up. I'm really excited about what you're doing. And hopefully I see nothing but good things. I think you guys are going to build. Here's my dream. I want you to build a giant burlesque museum, but I want you to put that 8-foot devil on the roof.
Yeah, maybe. We'll have to encase it in, I'm afraid if it gets wet, it's going to the paint's just going to rinse right off. But
we'll put it in a big glass case.
I
see it.
I want people to see it. I want people to see it. I was really upset we couldn't figure out a good way to display it in the space we had.
Yes. One day. Well, thank you, Dustin. This has been really, really awesome.
Yeah, it has been fun.
Well, I hope you now know a little bit more about burlesque. I definitely, after this conversation, had a long list of wonderful performers that I had to look up, and I went into a total deep dive, so I hope you do too. And if you haven't yet, watch my incredible interview with the iconic Pearl Noir. She is a legend. She's amazing. She was last week's guest, and it really was just absolutely phenomenal. And next week, for our last burlesque surprise guest, we have someone really amazing. I've seen her perform. I saw her perform in Las Vegas and Vita Von Teese's show, and I was like, I have to talk to this absolutely magical woman, and she was. So that's all I'm going to say. You'll have to tune in next week to find out who that is. Thanks so much. Like, subscribe, share this with someone who you think might be interested in burlesque, and we will see you next week.